Everybody saying,
That's what I wanted. Hi, everybody. I'm Sandy Friedman. I'm one of the advisors on the Eco Sustainability SIG of the San Diego chapter of ASCM. I'm also a master instructor. I'd like to introduce Preston Blevins tonight, who's our speaker about plastics. He's a practitioner, consultant, project manager with over 40,000 years of experience. Oh, sorry, just 40. Typo there. Currently, he's a volunteer leading our educational initiative on eco sustainability. He's our fearless leader and our senior director there. And he's also tonight's lecturer on plastics. He's been involved with ASCM, also known as APICS, uh, almost since it was started in 1957, but not that long. I follow right behind him personally. I've also been involved with APICS for most of my career. And he has guided, during his career, has guided manufacturers in leveraging information, technology, ERP systems, and so forth to improve productivity, reduce inventory, and align with customer needs. He's worked with many ERP systems. He's an author of a book on food manufacturing, and he is an all-around good guy, and he's still working with us today in ASCM. Never stops. So let me hand it over then to Preston. Say hello. And if anyone has any questions during the presentation, I think it's okay to unmute yourself and ask the question. We'll be happy to take it at that time. So Preston, over to you.
okay, thank you. If I can move on, there's a title. We're going to talk about plastics, and plastics are made in factories, and they're made of fossil-based raw materials. So we'll be spending a lot of time on that. But relative to the session tonight, I really want interaction. I want you to speak freely. And I recommend, and the very next slide, I'll get to hopefully moving forward. Let me see if it will move forward and doesn't lock on me. Oh, why is that locking on me suddenly? Hmm. There it is. My recommendation is that you take notes because we will get to, in every slide, at the bottom of every slide, I will narrate what that, will be a hyperlink. I'll narrate what that hyperlink has in it. And at the end of this session and follow in a few days, you'll get in the email a PDF, and all those links that I pointed out and described will be open for you. And I think you'll find in every case them to be informative. They'll take you deeper into this whole understanding of the plastics dilemma, and it's something you could go back and forth. Everyone selected, every hyperlink is from a credible source such as PBS, Forbes, some regulatory agency, etc. So please get some paper and a pencil or a pen or whatever, and just jog down little notes about what you see so that you'll know um, what those hyperlinks mean. I will put a little tag in front of it, but that may not be sufficient a week from now or 2 weeks from now when you get to looking at the PDF. Okay, discussion. That's where I really want a discussion. I'll use the word trigger. Hopefully it'll trigger your thoughts in your conversation. The first thing that we'll go over is a facts overview. By facts, I'm not talking about FAX, something being transmitted. I'm talking about facts about the situation today that prompted me and my team to put this together and make it available to you about this paradox and all these things that are very disturbing that we thought need to be shared. The second point of discussion, hopefully triggering your involvement, would be an overview of plastic and the trash problem today. And it's actually a bit deeper and more convoluted than you would suspect or even believe of it to be. Then we'll move on to the raw materials and feedstocks that go into the making of plastic. And by the way, there is good plastic and bad plastic. And this is not a condemnation of plastic without exception. This is really going after the manipulation of the public and the bad plastics that are getting into our environment and damaging it, the environment, and damaging us, human beings. And then we'll move on to the potential health issues. And some of this might shock people, but we're actually under assault right now from aspects of plastic production in the product itself. And then we'll move on to formulations and manufacturing. And then when you get into that, you start to see the complexity and breadth of the plastic industry, which is far larger than 99% of the population understands. And we'll talk about the plastic treaty, various initiatives, and standards. We'll spend a little bit less time there only because understanding the problem is the beginning of talking about fixing the problem. But I'll start it with that last mini discussion, that last point. So bear in mind, I'm looking for triggers. Now, what I like to start with is a facts overview, and I'm going to use a little trick. I want to show you 3 or 4 short paragraphs. I will read them, and would like you to answer them as to what you understand, or just give me your feedback about what that paragraph meant to you. What did you read into it? What was it describing? Okay, this is just to loosen us up, but it's a very powerful message, and I'll share how it was developed in a little bit. The first paragraph, the comprehensive examination. Hang on, I got to move this silly piece here. The comprehensive examination of plastic impacts reveals a crisis of scope and complexity that far exceeds current public understanding and policy responses. Okay, let's just take a couple seconds, a few seconds, 30 seconds, and if everybody could think about it, and if someone would like to break the ice and just give me your understanding of what that paragraph is trying to communicate.
I guess in layman's terms, we would say that the general public does not really have a good understanding of how plastics are impacting the environment.
Right.
They might not be very clear on uh, the way it is manufactured, or the way it decomposes, or the way certain types of plastic might be carcinogenic and hence detrimental to your health. And
Great.
then it also probably says that there's also a lack of understanding on how the government's policies or environmental policies that would dictate how plastic should be used or discarded is not sufficient with today's times.
Correct. Wow, what a great answer. Really appreciate that. That's a really great answer. Let me move on to the next comment or paragraph. The limitation of plastic concerns to waste management issues has obscured the significant climate impacts embedded throughout the plastic life cycle. So just give that a few seconds. If someone would like to comment on that, they would be appreciated. The group would share. It'll just further their understanding by getting different statements and inputs.
I can give this one a shot, Preston.
Sure.
So, my takeaway from this sentence is the public, or often people, think of plastic as just a landfill issue where we're creating these single-use objects, or maybe even multiple-use objects that live in the landfill for the rest of their life. But most people don't consider all of the emissions and the raw materials, and everything else to create plastics, transport them, and use them, as well as they reach the end of their life, the degradation and microplastics and all sorts of issues outside of just the landfill.
Great. Very, very succinct. Appreciate that. Let's move on to the next one. Emerging evidence of health consequences from microplastic exposure and chemical additives as an urgent imperative for more comprehensive intervention strategies. This is open now. We have a number of people attending, so everybody has an opportunity to pitch in and help the rest of us understand stuff.
I'm no subject matter expert on this, but I definitely understand that people are ingesting microplastics without their own knowledge of it in a way that is then later to be tested that they exist inside our body through laboratory testing. I'm not entirely sure if they've come to many conclusions on what that ends up affecting, but I suppose the fact that we don't know is also kind of alarming.
Great. Thank you, Bobby. Appreciate that.
Can I
And
chime
by the
in
way,
on that?
welcome. I haven't had occasion to interact with you, so I really appreciate you attending today. I'm looking forward to you hopefully taking advantage of our program here on eco-sustainability.
Preston, I had a comment on that last paragraph as well.
Oh.
We now have evidence, I'm sure Preston will cover later, and it's also in our curated website. We have papers and evidence that shows that microplastics are invading our ecological environment as well as our own bodies. And we can save till later in what organ they're attacking or they're existing in. But that's right. The previous person who commented, we don't have evidence yet that all these microplastics are like causing cancer or causing any kind of health issues. All we know now is that they are there. And this research is going on right now to see if there is a connection between the microplastics in our own bodies and any type of health issue that we may have. So that's an ongoing issue. And I assume, Preston, you're going to cover some of that later.
Right, will do. Yes, I plan on
All
that.
right.
And there
Very
is
good.
evidence. There is some evidence. You just have to correlate it. Okay, next final comment, I think it's the fourth one, is the interconnected nature of these projects or interconnected nature of these projects amplified by climate change is concentrated in vulnerable communities. That is the disadvantaged. So would someone like to comment on this? And I mean, have you seen a chemical factory in Beverly Hills?
Well, I'll
I
go
can
again.
oh,
Oh, go ahead, Nick.
I'll throw out my idea, and Sandy, feel free to chime in. I think there are multiple ways you could take this last sentence. But like Preston was saying, well, oftentimes communities that are vulnerable economically or maybe minority populations face a lot of the impacts of factories or environmental pollution. And if you're looking at greater climate change, oftentimes vulnerable communities see a lot of these impacts too and don't have the resources to combat them.
All right, great. Okay, and there's one last one. I forgot all about that. Let me see if I can move my little nuisance away. These realities, let me just see what I can do here. Oops. I've got to fix this. I've got this window
We can see it fine. We can see it fine, Preston.
Oh, okay. These realities demonstrate the need for a systematic approach that addresses design, one could call it engineering, production patterns, material selection. Again, fossil fuel materials tend to be the building block of plastic today, and consumption behaviors, rather than focusing on exclusively on the end of life management. And I think this is related to an earlier question, but perhaps someone else can jump in and participate.
Well, I'll take it. Most of plastics today, what we know about it is dealing with just the just the disposal of waste, plastic waste. I found an article, for example, in the local newspaper a couple of weeks ago, and it'll be posted on our curated website very shortly, that talks about foreign countries no longer importing our plastic waste. For example, Singapore was a big importer of our plastic waste. China used to do it as well. And what would they do with it? They put it in their landfill. So what's the real gain here? The idea here is to look at the circularity or the womb to tomb effect of how do we produce plastics, how are they used, and how are they disposed. What we should think about if we do still need plastics, can we manufacture them in a more sustainable fashion using recyclable materials? Can we develop technologies that will in fact recycle the plastic that we throw away? As Preston alluded to, we all believe that plastics that we throw away in our blue barrel are recyclable. In fact, they are not. Most of them are not. Some are, but most are not. So we need to look at the whole supply chain of plastics to figure out how to attack that and reduce the carbon footprint, reduce the plastic footprint on our planet.
Very great. Let me just now share where I got all this information. Believe it or not, I wrote a very succinct profile of what I was trying to get by way of information. And I used perplexity, which is just a system layered on top in which there are different models, all the popular models today, and asked it a variety of questions. And this is the way they summarized, the system summarized the set of circumstances that we experience today. And I have never seen something so succinct. So I've been an AI bigot going back decades. This is the first time I saw something truly practical come out of it. So at any rate, um, I don't know why I'm really not happy with the way this version of the system is operating. So let me just move on now to the next part of our presentation.
Everything looks fine. Preston,
Good?
everything looks fine to us.
Okay. What I really want to talk about is the recycling status next. That's next up in line. And really, when you look at it, everybody has all kinds of numbers. And I've heard numbers up to 10%. But the reality is today, the actual material coming out of that bin that we all faithfully fill up, that makes it to a recycled state is only 5%. And the next point we'd like to cover in some detail is the outsourcing of trash. And it's been pretty vigorous in the past. People don't know about it. And actually, we've been in many ways sort of a fraud has been conducted that misleads us. And in fact, that fraud is, as we'll discover later on in the discussion, led to litigation. And then we'll move on to innovation to show that despite rather impressive background power plays by some major corporations, innovation can, in many ways, take care of difficult plastic recycling problems. And then we'll just talk briefly about circular economy thinking. Is that a way? Because it gets down to reuse of everything. But at the end, we'll spend a bit more time on it. But I guess moving on to the next point would be a good thing to do, and that's outsourcing trash. Right now, there is a convention that was conducted some time ago and agreed. It's called the Basel Convention. Obviously, it would be in Switzerland. And it has extensive coverage of plastic trash. In fact, the convention, really its goal is the control of transboundary movements of hazardous wastes and their disposal. And there have been subsequent conventions that are related to this. One was conducted in the Netherlands, and another one, the final one latest one that's been conducted was in Stockholm. Those tended to deal with just the chemical wastes, not the plastic trash, which the Basel Convention did. 131 companies have ratified this particular convention, and only 3 or 4 others and the US have not. And actually, this has backfired on the US, as we'll soon find out. It has not been the smartest thing for them to do, but nevertheless, that's the case. Now, if we get down to some of these hot links that I talked about, I mentioned that there'll be a short description and a hyperlink. And when you get your PDF, you can go look this up and you'll see that there's really a lot of content there that's organized in a way that's digestible. There's one here that's something worth looking at. I'm finding out that YouTube either has garbage, stuff that is just very temporary in nature, or has some very professional, scientifically sound, meaningful content. And this fits into that meaningful content. And they're using, this actually is occurring not in the US, it's occurring in the UK. And it shows what happens where a reputable grocery merchant who is committed to all kinds of good things by way of the environment is actually fooling folks, and it's documented, and it's entertaining, professionally done, and it's quite an education. I submit that we in the US around the year 2017 um, really stopped doing that export freely because of certain circumstances that we'll cover in a minute. And here's something that's a result of us not participating and ratifying is that we were sending trash, like plastic trash, to Malaysia, and they now have rejected it. They no longer want our trash. They no longer want to salvage any of it. So we've become something of a pariah in the world out there, as you can see. But anyway, moving on. Let me move to the very next slide. This is a really interesting site. It's called The Visual Capitalist. And in it, you can see that there are, and this covers time, a period of time. You can move the slider back and forth. And you can notice as of 2022, the US looks pretty clean, right? Canada's exporting stuff. People are processing it who are parts of this whole thing. They're being circular economy participants. And by this color coding, you could see that we don't have much outbound traffic right now. And that's not because we've dealt with it within our continent, within our country. Because if you move to the very next thing that comes up, that's that thing called history. In 2016, China was importing more than half of the world's traded plastic trash. But by 2018, this had plummeted to less than 1%. And why did they do that? Well, the reason for this dramatic decline was the Chinese government's ban on the import of most types of plastic waste in 2017. Oh, okay. What prompted them to do that? These bans were implemented as a result of environmental and health concerns from contaminated waste streams. So you can see that the US is nice and clean. They're not exporting it anymore. They probably were doing very much of what was in that example, that YouTube recording that I pointed out, that hopefully you will watch because it's very informative and well done. And so now we're stuck with, now we have to deal with the trash. But I doubt that we're really dealing with the plastic trash. There is an interesting part of this, and I'll click this next thing here. That is, this hyperlink also will take you to the site where the simulator exists, and it does all kinds of great things. So you can go look at various things, who's doing what in the world, 2D, 3D, select countries. So it's a very valuable tool. Okay, moving on. So far, we've covered that recycled bin conversion is 5% or less. That outsourcing of trash is going on in the rest of the world. We were doing it very heavily until China cut off the demand. And because we didn't sign the convention, People don't want our trash. So now let's just look at, and by the way, here's some other interesting um, things that you may want to look at. This is from PBS, which is the Public Broadcasting System. And it really is talking about ExxonMobil's push to show people that the advanced recycling system that they have been uh, suggesting exists today is really not feasible and really has been a sham. So you get counterpoints from scientists, and you can clearly see by watching this that they've not been truthful. And the last one, their advanced recycling efforts, a PR effort, there you can see that people are catching on. And as you view it, you can see that their fake plant that they've put together to show people that what they said they were doing 50 years ago is not only now beginning. In fact, it hasn't really begun. So anyway, I hope you'll find those useful and entertaining as well in a kind of educational way. So innovation is much has occurred in packaging. In fact, it's a whole topic itself. And there are lots of activity there on the difficult to recycle. People are stepping out and trying to do things that make sense. An example of something difficult to recycle would be, and the example was the little packets. If you go to get some at a local fast food place, and it's ketchup or taco sauce or whatever else, well, someone's come up with schemes to deal with that. That is more a statement to the public that they too are on the environmental thread or direction or bandwagon or whatever you want to call it. But it's a very difficult situation. So they're willing to spend the extra money to even take care of this difficult situation. And then blending is occurring where certain companies have decided they're going to take some, they're going to mix recycled materials that have been reclaimed and virgin materials all together to make a blend. So they're going to kind of, it's almost like the hybrid car approach to making a plastic product or a plastic blend. And the information you can glean from the PDF would be this hyperlink to the Sustainable Packaging Association. Now, I find it interesting. Their membership is huge. It's huge. And you can see that the major corporations that have vested interest in selling more and more plastic or the raw materials for more and more plastic, they're already seated in there trying to do mischief. But anyway, it's very worth going through that to see that people are concerned. So it's a good learning experience accessing it. The hard to recycle example I've given you there, it shows that entrepreneurial folks who really want to do good can take on difficult challenges and work through a whole ecosystem to deal with making it work. But there's a price. But then there's a price of doing business. And if companies want to be viewed favorably, there's something that can deal with the difficult to recycle products that they or byproducts they have in their business. And here's one I mentioned, a pilot plant, recycle plus virgin. This is in Italy. This one's an article, but I found it interesting because the reason why this major factory is considering making this blend of plastic of recycled versus virgin is because the Chinese output of plastics has now started to dominate the world and drive prior manufacturers literally to the brink. So so this motivation has been, their motivation has been survival. Okay, and I just wanted to point out that we do have a SIG, and it does have plastic pollution and microplastic, etc. in it, plus a whole variety of stuff. And Sandy, who's in on a session right now, he's the curator. And he's done a great job. So it's very information rich, and he'll talk about it a little bit more later on. Okay, so we know about the output. And by the way, I didn't go over the output very well. The starting output, by the way, in 1950 of plastic production in the U.S. was 2 million metric tons. Oops, let me go back. Got an overly sensitive mouse. By the year 1985, we had gotten up to 100 metric tons from, bear in mind, 2 metric tons. We're now up to 100. By the year 2003, and I don't know why if this is in PowerPoint without presentation mode, it actually pops up the date and the amount. And now our current date, roughly our current date, about a couple of years ago, it was up to 400,000 metric tons, and it increased even further. And the projected amount is going out into the future as to 1,000 metric tons. And I've thought deeply about whether I wanted to add even more content to this overview. And would add more, but the pricing and the costing and the investments going out that are being made by the oil companies and the chemical companies suggest that that projection is probably a little bit, well, it's almost pessimistic. 1,000 metric tons, maybe, maybe they're just minimizing what they think will occur. I don't know. But at any rate, moving on, the last point under this whole thing of the status of recycling, etc., is the litigation. And the state of California is suing ExxonMobil, the largest supplier of feedstock to the plastic industry. All the polymers, etc., that make up the whatever. And the state of California has asserted that their advocacy of advanced recycling, which they've done for 50 years, leading people to believe that it is feasible, is nothing more than a myth. And it's been done to drive usage. And of course, part of the usage is that more and more products have been made in plastic that perhaps were not the best choice for a raw material, but the availability and the cost performance may have driven that, plus the myth. And so the lawsuit is, first of all, I think they're going to win. I've been following the current Attorney General Bonta. He's a very articulate person, and he's very determined. In fact, California is suing oil companies as well, and they're taking the long view. This may take 10, 15. This will be just like tobacco, long time, just like asbestos, a long time, but they will prevail. And there are 4 parts of it. The last point is the restitution. And if you look at the profit margins of ExxonMobil, like they pulled in over 50 billion in profit. So they're doing quite well. So they want to take back, they want to claw back some of that for good purposes. Civil penalties, because their feeling is that the laws have been violated, therefore there should be penalties. Abatement for education, to let people know that this thing has been a myth and you have to be a responsible consumer. And then injunctive relief, which is stop deceiving people. So that's what's going on. Now, there's a great interview, hyperlinked, by the Attorney General, and it's PBS, again, a very credible forum, public broadcasting system that captured as a preamble to it, and then the interview with Bonta. This guy's sharp. Whenever he litigates, he's got the facts down pat. So litigation is occurring. There's also some evidence out there. There's an organization called Climate Interactive Evidence, and they've pulled together, and there's kind of a rolling scheme where it'll roll through various documents. You can click on to show that the industry knew that they were colluding and it was doing damage. They were misleading the public. I think they have 3 or 4 teasers or samplers of that stuff. And by the way, all this also applies to the oil companies when it comes to mobile transportation and gas. they knew back in the late 70s or early 50s through a trade organization that they sponsored a report, a study for, but they knew they were doing bad things. And then, of course, everybody knows about the Exxon report that their engineers put out that had to be withdrawn because management wanted it denied. So we've had lots of evidence. This is evidence strictly about plastic. So we've covered historical production output and future projections, cycling rate status, and litigation. So any general questions at this point? Looks like I've got to roll through a little bit faster, so bear with me. Raw materials and feedstocks. This is what it takes to make plastics and all sorts of other things. But if you notice that the raw material input in both cases, particularly with plastics, is either natural gas converted into something else or crude oil. And that's the building block. And the little hyperlink below is from a UK organization. And it really is a very fine, straightforward, simple to understand um, education on petrochemical industry. So it's worth looking at. Now, here's the one that really got me excited, and I came across this information with a WRI broadcast on plastics. That's the World Resources Institute. They're the owners of the GHG protocol. They're the creators and owners of it. And in it, they had this finding that was broadcast out, and my brain cells kind of popped, and my eyes widened when I saw that. But let's go over this hypothetical question: if the plastic industry was a nation, and first of all, we know who the top three are. It's pretty much common sense. It's China, as in megatons and all that stuff. Is they 30% of the emissions, and the USA is 11%, and India is 8%. Now, one could argue the USA amount would be more, but I know because I'm old enough to know that by and large, there were periods of time where we discouraged chemical factories being built because they were a big problem. I lived in New Jersey until I was 16, and I remember chemical factory fires and accidents occurring fairly frequently. And the fourth one that is speculated on, that probably would move up higher than four, is Russia, because information flows are not coming out. I would expect with all the stuff they're creating with war, that they're creating a lot of emissions. But I don't know about plastic, but I'm over beyond plastic. I know they're a big emitter. Prior to plastic, they would have been number four, but we don't know the real number. The plastics comes in number five, and that means that it is a bigger producer of plastic emissions than about 190 plus other countries. That was the thing that blew my mind. So, any thoughts, comments? So you can, I copied my little questions to Perplexity. And by the way, I'm not using Perplexity as a main information source. I use it to validate what I think I already know. And what I like about it is it gives you citations. So you can ask for even more citations. You can change the model that is generating the answers. That's why I use it. So, but it only substantiates, I'm trying to figure out whether my understanding is correct, independent of using it and prior to using it. So another consideration, it gives you the bigger picture, right? So we know we're making more emissions making plastic. We know there's lots of deception about recycling plastic, and we know that there are a lot of bad things going on. But we have to look at the raw materials and its life cycle. I think this is a big deal. CO2 in the atmosphere has a life cycle of at least 100 years. So the crap we're putting out today is going to be there 99 years from now. It may be diluted slightly over time, but it's there. So the only thing we can do is stop putting it there and hopefully let nature and other means let it dissipate. In fact, there is a threshold of GHG in the atmosphere that if you get low enough and it is generated, actually doesn't, it goes straight through our outer upper our atmosphere out into space. And I don't remember what that parts per million threshold is, but I looked it up once, not using Perplexity. And methane has 100 years, but the point here is that even though it is a lesser of the two polluters by way of volume, in fact, CO2 is the big volume. It's the big 500-pound gorilla. And when you see CO2e is an equivalent because there's 6 other GHG emission types that are part of the whole calculation. So methane may be less, but in fact, even at the 100-year mark, it is 28 times greater in its warming potential in the atmosphere than is CO2. And in fact, within the first 7 years, it's 80 times more potent. So this is, the output from the raw materials and its extraction. And by the way, there are thousands of uncapped, undermanned methane emitting wells in California alone. So they're not doing us any favors. So any comments about the raw materials and feedstocks? Is there anything new here that someone wants to say, aha, I never knew that? Anybody have aha, I never knew that moment?
I think plastics being number 5 in terms of comparing it to countries and CO2 emissions is an aha moment. And I was curious, Preston, is that just emissions from producing plastic?
That's the raw materials, anything associated with the plastic. This life cycle of the plastic. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. By the way, there's a statement I heard that it's kind of far-fetched, but maybe not too far-fetched. That is, the first piece of plastic ever made is still with us. Because when plastic degradates, it becomes particles, and then it becomes nanoparticles, and there's a transformation, and it becomes a vapor, can become a vapor, I would presume. And I just know that that kind of rides the coattails of energy never goes away. It just transforms itself into a different form. So anybody else in the group?
Preston, by chance, what rank was Mexico since it's right here border to?
I stopped at just as an industry. I didn't look it up, but
Oh, okay.
but you can use Perplexity or you could just look it up in general. And the key
Okay.
in looking up anything is look for a very specific. Mexico, by the way, as an oil producer, has really dropped off because of the lack of expertise in managing the wells. It takes a lot of energy. What's incredible is the intellectual wherewithal to do drilling and extraction and in complicated situations is immense. I mean, Russia's in deep trouble because most of their wells and stuff out in Siberia, they don't have the expertise to manage them. They were using Western resources to manage it all. So I really don't know. But Mexico has not been a major producer of oil for quite some time. They still produce oil, but it's not major like it could have been or should have been when we thought oil was good. Any other thoughts? Okay. Let me move on to potential health issues. Okay. I say potential biological health issues. I think it's here already. And the first one is clinical studies regarding this have increased significantly. And I know the very first one that caught my attention was a study where they found micro plastic particles in male testicles. And also they did it for cadavers. And the study wasn't big. It's roughly like 20 people. And then they actually got it from from dogs because, you know, the mammals have the same processing systems as we do. And in fact, they found it from when they did neutering. And it came back that almost every single sample at that point had plastic in it, microparticles. And by the way, the difference between micro and nano is really, I'm a little stunned because I've authored a textbook on food safety and sustainability. And when I was really into nano, because I wanted to know what it was, the FDA was scared of nano. It has the potential to get to a disease, a cancer, for example, and get to it where other organs and parts of our body would prevent the normal means to get to it. And the only normal means to get to it would be surgery by penetrating beyond that into the cancer directly. So I know about nano. Nano is really, really kind of potential is there, but it's kind of scary. So some believe that we are now into the nano particle level with plastics. So others tried to emulate that, and lo and behold, I understand that all the others that followed, because everybody who's in clinical science and professors at universities that are tasked with research, they all will do studies. And so there's been other studies that confirm that original finding. So the concentration in organs, it was there only because, and it caught people's attention only because anything that deals with men first, we get all the attention, whether we want to admit it or not. We get more attention than women when it comes to stuff. So it's in all parts of the body. It's in the bloodstream, etc. So there's one that kind of correlates the concentration in the testicles, etc. There was a significant sperm count decline rate that's occurred, and studies covering this were cover at least it over a 15-year period with multiple studies with very large participation population that were involved in the studies. And I've got the hyperlink to the individual that is kind of a global guru on what is it? I can't pronounce it. On internals of the body and the functions of the body and things, how things work.
Endocrinology.
Yes, thank you. Okay, sperm count's declining. And that person found that the sperm count itself the decline is now doubling itself every 5 years because they had follow-on studies. And the YouTube I have, this person has published books, etc., on the chemical industry and this whole dilemma. And I suggest to everybody, it's a long one, but they should really look into it. Has implications for, I know I have grandchildren. I have 2 male grandchildren. I'm really not happy about that at all. Future liability, and this is really interesting because we knew smoking was bad, but it still took 15, 20 years to really get that all wrapped up with liability. But I suspect there's going to be liability in the end. Now, these are the 2 studies that or videos I recommend you go look at. The first one is a medical and formulation, and it's 2 parts, so you have to bear with it. First part is by a physician who is really a wunderkind, really one of the smartest people I've ever come across. My introduction was during COVID, where he has a business he created where he teaches pre-med students difficult topics about medicine. And he actually is on the front line. During COVID, he was giving advice about how to cope with it and making the understanding of what COVID was doing just flat out simple. I mean, anybody could watch it and say, he's great. So the first half is he's talking about the studies on the microplastics. Then the conversation shifts where his partner goes to Harvard and talks to their research department on chemicals, etc. So the second part is in it. And their whole idea is they're attacking what they call whack-a-mole. Every time the chemical industry comes up with something and it becomes an issue, they come up with a better version of it and claim that they solved the problem, but they haven't. So in the lab at Harvard, they are innovating by creating formulations, plastic formulations and chemical formulations that in fact are benign, which is what we want them to be. Now, this doesn't say, I'm not saying all plastic is hostile and will create cancer, etc. The point is that they're striving to do bioplastics. And then along with the sperm count is also size of the penis has been diminished. And again, it's happening every 5-year increments. So there's kind of jokes in a little joke made about we'll have to figure out new ways of reproduction. So these two are both worth watching, but bear in mind the first one has 2 parts to it, and the second one is rather long, but very well worth the watch. It really triggered me to think about all of this, and then I found a statement that drove me to do. First the statement when I heard it is a given plastics, the right formulation might last up to 1,000 years after going through all its transformation forms. And I thought, wow, 1,000 years, that's pretty, whatever. Then I heard or recall from my mind someone saying the first piece of plastic still exists in a different form today. So they took, in this example, a typical plastic bag, which is the cheap stuff that you would use for 12 minutes. That was the average use time of a plastic bag. And then over time, they said, well, that might take up to 1,000 years to decompose. I think that's an exaggeration. But even if we cut it down to 500 to 250, here's the point that got me. I start thinking about my role and my age and all that stuff, and I go, okay, I am I'm the first generation of my tribe, my clan, right? Okay, and then I have my children, and my children now have had their children, and they in 5 years will be able to have their children, so we'll have 4th generations. But the span of time that they use here in this example, I only talking about 4. They're talking about at least 33 generations. So that's, when we talk about it being in the environment, in the atmosphere, we're talking about it being present on the planet in various forms for up to 1,000 years. That's pretty incredible. Now, this is me trying to be Preston the scientist, and I'm not really, but I just had to do this to kind of, it's almost like therapy. Okay, let me move on to any comments about that before we move on. The health issues, potential health issues.
I really like the generations as a reference for time.
Yes, it is. It's kind of spooky. Shows you, I have a grandson now, 1-year-old. How do we protect him? And I have one that's only 20. How do we stop? In fact, there's actually a movie production out that was, I didn't put it in here. I didn't put all the stuff because once you start looking at what I suggested, you're going to open up a whole, and go to our website, going to open up a whole venue or avenue or avenue, I should say, to learn more learning. Okay, formulation and manufacturing, and we're getting near the end here. I just wanted to show you what, in very simplistic terms, what I found about the various feedstocks and all the sub-assemblies involved, and then the fillers and additives, and then the final plastic forms. And just very simply stated, what I found right away was this disturbed me. And that's why we're here today, is that petroleum derivative materials, or oil there, crude oil and natural gas, are the dominant players, and you'll see how dominant in a minute via a different way. And alternative raw materials, bioplastics, are starting to bubble around on the surface. And thanks to hopefully the actions of what's going on at the university level, that will take hold. So just a frame of reference, just kind of a simple thing. But in the other part here that really surfaces, this is where maybe even in addition to the fact that you're getting these micro particles out, even if they're benign, and maybe even nano level at some point, that what they use as additives may be embedded and also being released. I don't know. So it's a care and keeping of the formulation that's very, very, very important. I suspect most of the, like we have two people that are involved in our team, our board. I know the companies they're involved with are very aware of this and very cautious about this. So they're working for good companies that are concerned about stuff like this. Well, the way that I try to get a real fix on how pervasive all this stuff is and where it's going is I did a query of what is the number of active fossil fuel feedstock derived plastic patents globally. So where are we on the good stuff? The new bioplastic, how early are we? And then system dynamics, which I'm learning about through En-ROADS, particularly on strategies to mitigate climate change. It takes a long time for things to happen, the breakthrough in technologies, etc. So, but you can see down here that all patents, plastic patents active, including fossil fuel based and bio, is over 1 million. 900,000 of them are in fact fossil fuel based formulations. Or patents. You assume a formulation of a patent, that's what they would do it right away. And biofuels or bioplastic rather is just we're in the tens of thousands, not the hundreds of thousands. So that's the scope of and the problem with formulation is you get the formulation right, and then we start to eliminate the problem. Okay, let me move on. Now there's another dimension to this, and this gets down to the injustice part. At that WRI webinar that I attended, they had someone from Louisiana who literally, and she was a scientist, she literally broke down. She was black. And here's she lived in this area in Louisiana that's referred to in literature as Cancer Alley in Louisiana. It's an 85-mile stretch. It's petrochemical and oil refineries everywhere. And you can see it in red on the right. And those are the different parts, the counties involved and areas involved. It has been recognized as a hazardous region for cancer. In fact, it's when it comes to cancer via air pollution, it's the highest in the US. And the residents of that particular area typically are Black and low-income residents. And the area itself, ironically, and this is where this person broke down and really was emotional, is it has historically been a former slave plantation. The whole geography was former slave plantations. So this is an example of inequity because of this pollution, etc. And what it did is it triggered in my mind. I lived in a place called Newark, which is very manufacturing intensive at the time. I left, Newark at age of 16. Newark had a lot of, even though it's a garden state, New Jersey, very rich soil, etc. They had a lot of chemical factories, and we had episodes that were pretty disastrous. So, and it was near poor areas. It's always near a poor, and the only exception is where a polluter isn't near a poor area that I have seen is power plants near the ocean. And power plants are there out of necessity because they didn't have a river to cool them. They need to be cooled. They can't operate unless they're cooled. I'm talking about the old style power plants. Well, actually, even if it was nuclear, it'd still be the same or gas driven. So they had to suck in water to cool, and that's why in places like Manhattan Beach and various other cities, off the top of my head, I can't remember. Hermosa Beach, for example, you have power plants right on the ocean. But other than that, you always will find the nasty stuff in a poor area. One is Compton. They had a battery factory in Compton. They wouldn't put a battery factory on Beverly Hills. Okay, so moving on. Any questions about that? I hate to be so. This sounds a little negative, and bear in mind, the right choices are there. There's good choices on plastics, and there's bad choices. And people just have to be aware and start thinking about how do you make good choices. So there is a plastic treaty that has been in negotiation by countries. And they've gotten to a point where they're stalemated between the issue of voluntary versus mandatory, binding versus voluntary. And the little graphic you see here is from the Wildlife Federation, and this is what they want. And these are the things that they think that should go on and be agreed on in the next meeting, which will be August next month of this year, typically. And at the very bottom, you see the hyperlink for the treaty if you want to go look at it. And there's another global map of single-use intensity and regulations, various countries that have banned single use. So I think you'll find that informative. But the other part here, and this is where, when it comes to fixing it, I kind of left off because I didn't know that I could actually do fixing it justice without um, establishing the situation, understanding the situation. In fact, there's a little trick. Did you notice anything different about the title? Basically, the title started out with fixing, not the word fixing, but implied fixing all of this. And I thought that was inappropriate when I start figuring out all that I had to say about the current status. So I changed it to understanding. So understanding is step one, fixing is step two. But they have this treaty, but there are powerful forces. Every country has, particularly industrialized country, or even those that aren't industrialized, have the fossil fuel industries being fairly influential. So it's going to be difficult to push things through quickly. It will take quite a while. And the only thing we could do at the public level is to turn up the heat. And hopefully this treaty will finally see the daylight in some actionable form in the next several years. And then it will take some time to unwind it and make it happen. But the Ellen MacArthur Foundation has really jumped in. And of course, their view of sustainability is circularity. And by the way, when you go back earlier where you have that one video that I've hyperlinked, you'll see where the ExxonMobil tries to demonstrate a new plant that they're building to support advanced recycling, which of course they've been proposing had existed for years, decades earlier. And the plant's basically empty. It's a pilot plant. And in it, the individual who's from ExxonMobil admits that what they're going to recycle, the recycled plastic will in fact be used, or they don't exclude it from being used as fuel again, meaning it will be fortified, the output of it, to be again turned into fuel, to be burned and put into the atmosphere. So it's a subtlety, but the interviewer forces them into an answer. So that's about as far as I can go within an hour. We did a good facts overview. Thank you for participating. We talked about the plastic and trash problem. You can see that it has all kinds of strange things going on. It almost feels like the old bootleg. In many ways, I feel like it's a good parallel would be bootleg. The things are getting bootlegged and smuggled. The way things are smuggled today, drugs, it's almost like has a kind of an overtone. The raw material feedstocks, potential health issues, which is bubbling around. It'll get bigger and bigger. more and more problems that endocrine problems we've talked about. There are things that we can't understand why they're now cropping up that they didn't crop up before, that people of a similar age in the past didn't have. I'm wondering, is it diagnostics weren't there, or is it really new? Talk about formulations and the role they play in the manufacturing sites. If they're not carefully crafted and dealt with, protection of the worker involved is not a good thing. And we learned about social injustice and just started to hint and poke just very briefly at the plastic treaty initiatives and standards. There are some standard proposals out that would be part of any follow-on if we got to that point and did a follow-on. But right now it's creating awareness. So I'm going to want to turn it over to Sandy so he can talk about our curated section, and maybe he can do a little tour of it, but I'll leave it there. What I did is in the handout, you'll see me highlighting it just as I have here. And I want to thank everybody for their time today and in attending. And we'll be available after Sandy's brief discussion, I'll be available at least for another 10, 15 minutes if anybody wants to stop and continue to talk. So I'm going to stop my share. And Sandy, can you take over?
Absolutely. Thank you, Preston, and everybody. Before I go into that website, I just wanted to show this graphic. Someone asked a question, where is Mexico on the ranking of carbon dioxide equivalents? So I pulled up this graphic while we were talking. China is number one, and the number is a little different from what Preston showed. Then the USA, then India, and I didn't look for Russia, but they're in here somewhere. But here's Mexico over here on the far right, and they're very small footprint, just 1.3%. Oh, here's Russia right here. So Mexico is there, but a very, very small portion. That doesn't excuse them, but it just shows you what the various relative rankings are of who's producing the most carbon dioxide equivalents. So there is that. Let me go over to our website. This is the ASCM San Diego chapter website. If you go there and you pull down eco-sustainability, first you go to the first one and it shows you oh, come on. First, it makes sure you're a human being. Come on, man. All right. And just an introduction to our eco-sustainability website that is run by Preston, and a nice introduction. Then you go to the same pull down, you go to curated. And that's what Preston had on his last slide. Here we have 19 categories of papers, articles, websites, videos, you name it. Almost 200 documents that we've added here over the last 3 years since we've been doing this. And one of the categories is micro and nanoplastic pollution. And if you go in there, if you click on that, then there's a whole list of articles and videos that I think you'll all find very, very interesting. Preston touched upon a lot of different things in plastic pollution, and here you can do a lot of more deep dives in here. There's a lot of videos. There's a PBS special I think Preston mentioned. There's one in particular. Here it is, YouTube video, Plastics Are a Never-Ending Gift from the Fossil Fuel Industry. This is one of our favorite ones. This is with Dr. Roger Schultz of MedCram, which is a funny name for a company, I guess. Scientific findings of the prevalence of implications of microplastics in our food and body. So anyway, check this out. And the only other thing I wanted to bring up was coming up in October, Preston and I are teaching this course, Building a Sustainable Supply Chain. You do have to sign up for it, and there is a fee involved, but in my opinion, it's well worth it. And here's all the information about what we cover, which is basically everything about eco-sustainability, including plastics. And I'm the instructor, and Preston is the co-instructor. And I'll now open it up to everybody else. Anybody else have any questions or comments about anything?
I've got a comment and a question. Thank you, Preston, for the presentation. That was very insightful. I did want to say, when looking at global greenhouse gas emissions by country, I think it would be very interesting to look at per capita, per person emissions, since when comparing China and India, they're so much larger countries. So I'll have to dig into that, and maybe I can find an article to send.
You know what? I remember reading something along those lines that per capita, it sorts that picture I showed a few seconds ago. It puts that in a different sortation order. So you're onto something there, but I don't recall offhand what that is or which article that was.
Just want to make a comment about that. The data from China about population may be very misleading. It is commonly known that there, because of the one-child policy and because of all the conflicts that took place before that China started to see a lot of positive growth, et cetera, in the old days, that the one-child policy in particular is that their population that they state is well overstated by anywhere up to 30 or 40, 300 to 400 million people. So they may have a smaller population than India. So per capita wouldn't help you there because they're lying about the numbers. If they're not lying, all the other thing is that some people have speculated that they truly don't know that's the circumstance. So per capita won't work in this case.
Preston, I've got a question. I was just thinking, what are you most optimistic about and pessimistic about after doing all your research on the plastic industry?
Well, actually, I'm getting very tactical. I've been tactical for the last year or two, and I'm trying to encourage my children to be tactical. I've thrown away a lot of things made of plastic, particularly things that get heated, and that I won't eat anything. You know, you buy a lot of this stuff where you're supposed to put it in the microwave and turn it on and whatever. I don't do that. I take it out of the plastic and I put it into a glass. I love glass. And I put it into metal, stainless. I don't use any coated stuff. I've gotten rid of my coffee maker. I now use glass and stainless. The cutting board example that I think is used somewhere, I think just using a plastic cutting board releases 1 billion microparticles when the knife slices into the cutting. So I've gotten rid of almost everything that is subjected to heat or extreme cold. I try to get away from it being plastic. In fact, to my shock, RO water turned out to have a fair number of microplastics in it because of the filters. So I'm thinking about going to use using distilled water only. I'm going to buy a tabletop distiller. So all you can do is just be discriminating about what you use, what you have that you cook with, or cut, or subject to a lot of stress. I'll get rid of it if it's plastic.
Okay, thanks, Preston.
It's
Is there anything you're
technically
optimistic about, even like globally or countrywide?
well, I
I
think
guess California litigation, maybe.
the litigation is will come to a resolution within, the 5 to 10 year period. So then things will happen. If we use tobacco as an experience or asbestos, it'll come to an end, but it'll take time. And actually, the only thing that will accelerate it happening sooner is if everybody becomes aware of what's going on and they start demanding stuff. They demand plastic formulations that are not toxic because you can make them. Even if you use fossil fueled plastic today, if it's the right application, it's the application, just like the right tool to fix for a certain purpose. To be used on a job is the right chemistry of the formulation to meet a purpose, to satisfy a need. So I hope right now I'm just trying to create awareness. The implementation over time is really dependent. If you can accelerate it by just demanding things, and you're buying the behaviors that you have. See, what they did is they created behaviors of waste, and they created a vision of plastic being practical, right? Recyclable. Once they see that they can't get away with that because people stop believing it and doing the right thing, then it'll happen. All they'll do in the end is, like all these oil wells, that 1,000 or 2,000, I think it's 2,000 or more, in California, all the people who own it will be dead, or the corporations will be bankrupt. And so the taxpayer is going to pick up the bill, just like that battery factory in Compton. Taxpayers picking up the bill. It's better to fight it while you're still alive and viable, and get them before they go out of business. So going after anyone but Exxon Mobil would be a mistake. I think they went after the biggest one that has the legs to survive, making a big settlement. And I'm talking about California now. Anybody else? Got any other people attending? Any input? How can we make this better, more informative for you?
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you for the excellent presentation. And feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. I feel like I read in the past that the synthetic elements in car tires were a major contributor to plastic contamination in the environment. Have you
True.
found any other, I guess, surprising or unexpected sources that normal people would be able to identify with that are contributing to environmental contamination?
It's so much. It's tires. In fact, I've one of the things I struggle with is what are the right words to communicate the fact that we've become numbed to the point that we buy so much plastic around us, and hearing a piece of bad news here and a piece of bad news there, and then the propaganda or the misleading of people of industry about the safety of this and the safety of that. Why I hadn't even thought about the tires again, which I knew about, is because you can only handle so much, but tires are a big problem. You're right. In fact, when you get into the plastic stuff, really the serious science stuff beyond what we're talking about right now, down at the global level, the pollution of all the waterways and the pollution of all the soil is it's a lot. It's almost like everything is a hazard site. So the faster the public knows about it and demands that it stop, the better. And if people at Harvard, if they can make good formulations, and there are other companies that have started. I mean, even the bad guys know that if they don't have a bioplastic products soon, in some way that maybe initially they're doing it just to show that they're being responsible, but it may just be a diversion. Who knows? It's hard to know. When they fooled you once, the trust level goes down. Well, you're right about the tires. The tires are a disaster.
I have a quick comment about plastics. Unlike cigarettes, plastics are almost a necessity in our lives. If we were to take all the plastic away, and I love one of those slides you showed, our civilization would cease to exist. So we either have to find a substitute for plastics that we're using today, or figure out a way to properly dispose of them or recycle them or digest them, as some companies are trying to do. It's kind of a trade-off. And this reminds me of back in the 80s. I used to work in medical research, by the way. Back in the 80s, there was a big outcry about using animals in medical research, and which was what I was working in. And all I can tell people is that, okay, fine, stop eating food, stop using cosmetics, don't go to the doctor, don't take drugs, and you'll be fine with not having animals used, I mean, I know people who have had heart surgery. I know people who have had all sorts of surgeries and medical treatments, cancer treatments. All of those would be impossible without using animals in some fashion in medical research. So it's a trade-off. As a society, we can either use animals in research and reap the benefits of that, or forget the benefits. Let's just die of cancer, die of disease, and let the animals live. So it's a tough trade-off. And I love animals, okay? I think everybody does. So it's a trade-off. Thing with plastics. When I first became aware of this whole plastics issue, I was thinking of single-use plastics in food production and in medical research. I was a big user of plastic pipettes, syringes, hypodermic needles in doing research, not for myself, but doing research and everything. And I can't imagine doing that research without having those materials available. Before plastics, we would use glass pipettes, glass implements, and they would have to be washed in a dishwasher. Hopefully, there's no contaminations left in them, but that's not always guaranteed. So when plastic implements became available, especially single use once, toss it out, that became a real boon for medical research and the capability to guarantee results from one experiment to the next. So in society, it's a trade-off. What do? We either stop the use of them and suffer from that lack of capability, or we use it and figure out a way to deal with the problem educationally, technologically, and then move on. It's just my input.
No, it's good input. I think I agree with you. It's all trade-offs. This En-ROADS course I'm taking about where they're talking about system dynamics, everything's a trade-off. But there still is no reason for we need the majority of our plastics. Everybody has to, a plastic has to be benign to start with from a medical standpoint and from a GHG emission standpoint. So I think that's a given. They cannot continue to make plastics from fossil fuels. They have to find new formulations and new sources. And when that one individual that was interviewed in that one video I referenced earlier, where he's in the advanced recycling facility that's barren, basically, and he's pressed. He says, "No, we'll make more fuels from it, so we'll emit more carbon. We're going to emit it all over again. We'll intensify the amount of plastics needed to be recycled to make a good fuel, and then we'll put it to along." We just have to cut off the idea that fossil fuels is is critical to our survival. We just have to go find the alternatives.
Right.
Anybody else? Still have 9 people sitting there. Someone must have questions. Well, I'd silence his endorsement. If hopefully you say good things about what you learned today, and expect that you'll get a PDF and the hyperlinks. And if you bring it up on your computer, you'll be able to do a lot of research. And I was very careful to make sure that anything I suggested was not boring or unprofessionally put together, and always, had good information in it. So hopefully see you next time. Have a great week, and we appreciate your joining us tonight.
Happy birthday, Preston.
Thank you.